Hello, I'm Dr. Heather Price, and I'm a lecturer and staff tutor in the School of Psychology and Counselling. And I'm really pleased to be able to introduce members of the Mulberry Bush organisation today. The Mulberry Bush is a charity. It's based in rural Oxfordshire, and a main part of the charity's work is a school, which is a residential childcare home and specialist school for children who've been impacted by trauma, primary age children. And the children are placed in partnership with their families and with the local authority. The Mulberry Bush also has a learning and research centre that supports trauma-informed training and practice throughout Southern England and internationally. And it's got a new venture, Mulberry Bush Third Space, which is a residential training site in Gloucestershire with a big archive for the Planned Environment Therapy Trust and for the National Children's Library, and containing records from therapeutic communities for children, including the Mulberry Bush's own records, going back to its founding in 1948. So I'll hand over now to John Turberville, who's the Chief Operating Officer at the Mulberry Bush.
My name is John Turberville. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Mulberry Bush charity, and I was the director of the school for about 10 years. So the Mulberry Bush started back in 1948 on the current site in Standlake, and it was started by Mrs. Ducker Drysdale and her husband Stephen and their family, and they moved to a large farmhouse on the site there. And what they started to do was to look after evacuees who'd been displaced by the war. And over time, what they started to see were certain sort of behaviours, certain things going on for the children, and they wanted to understand more about that. And so Mrs. Ducker Drysdale had monthly meetings with Donald Winnicott at the time, and they both really started to grapple with what was going on for the children and how best to help them. And I suppose in many ways that's work that continues today. So that sort of mutual process of learning, and in many ways I suppose the research, getting others' perspectives, started at that time. And I suppose that idea of really being open to others' perspectives is very important, because that means that we can feel more confident about the practice that's going on day to day in all of our services. So that sort of self-reflection and using others' perspectives to tailor and hone our services has been very important to us. And in many ways, it is exactly what we ask the children to do every day as well, which is to really to grapple with their own situations and what's been going on for them. Over the last 10 years, I suppose, 10 or 12 years, what we've done is increased our focus on research and action research. So we've started our own research department, and we started our own outreach team. I suppose what all of this does is try to ensure that we're a progressive sort of charity. So we're really interested in ensuring that we're ambitious for the quality of all our services, and that we remain interested in everybody else's perspectives in what we're doing. And what we're hoping, I suppose, is that focus and that ambition really ensures that the outcomes for the children and the families and all those that we now help, which includes adults and families and their communities, is the best it can possibly be. What we do now have is a quite extensive ex-pupils network, and we have an ex-pupils advisory group. So we bring together a group of ex-pupils who attended the Mulberry Bush School across the decades, so from the 1950s all the way up to present day, although we remain with sort of post-18, those that are 18 and over. And what we do is we bring them together and talk to them about what we're doing in terms of our services, how we can do better with the services that we currently offer. But we're also interested in their thoughts about how we can develop new services that may well help pupils like them when they've left somewhere like the Mulberry Bush, but I suppose more generally all those who have suffered early life trauma.
I'm Dr. Karen Onions, and I'm the Head of Research and Development at the Mulberry Bush. I have been at the school for nearly 16 years, and I've had this research role for the past 3 years. Before that, I've got a social work and child psychotherapy background, so very much on the ground clinically and working with children and families for most of my my career. And it's only latterly that I did my own piece of research at the University of Exeter, and my particular interest was thinking about the experience of parents and carers who have children who are looked after by somebody else, and what's that experience like for them. And so I left the clinical role and I've moved sideways over into a research role. We have a lot of work. Well, one of my roles is to try and think, what actually do we want to find out at the school? What is it that people are interested in about us as an organisation? And one of the things that we keep coming up against is about actually what is it that makes an organisation therapeutic? That seems to be something that we have in common with a lot of other residential settings and childcare settings, not only in the United Kingdom, but also internationally. So it's quite a topical issue now at the moment as well. So we have really got things that I think through our research that we can share with other organisations and really get a research conversation going, because I think within the field of childcare, in its broadest sense, residential therapeutic care has had very little attention in terms of good quality, real in-depth research and helping practitioners understand what it means to be therapeutic. And that sort of takes me right back to what John mentioned earlier on about Dr. Drysdale's link with Winnicott and really grappling through some of these issues. And she wrote extensively at the time. And I think what we're doing now is really looking at, so what's practice look like now in 2021, sort of 70 years later, really? And what's the research telling us about our practice? And we have developed some good links with Oxford Brookes University, where we're doing some work, particularly thinking about what life's like in the classroom, and what does it. We're particularly working on a piece of research at the moment about what does emotional security for a child look like in a classroom, and sort of thinking broadly about, what does a therapeutic classroom look like? How do you teach traumatized children in a therapeutic way? Those are massive questions, really, for the practitioners, for the teaching staff. So that's an interesting collaboration. We have undertaken 2 really big pieces of research that we've collaborated on with other organisations. So we initially did a quantitative piece of research with the Institute of Education at UCL in London. And that was really looking at a variety of outcomes for the children, academic, social and emotional, and sort of behavioural outcomes. So a full range of quantitative outcomes for the children. And that was then complemented by a qualitative piece of research that was undertaken by the University of East London, where we had a team of researchers who came in and did observations of the staff and the children in situ over a long period of time. And they also did interviews with staff, they did interviews with stakeholders, parents and carers, and they were really able to sort of drill down into what does it look like? What does therapeutic practice look like at the Mulberry Bush?
Yeah, Karen, I just wanted to come in actually and just make a couple of points about the findings from the 2 big pieces of research that you commissioned at the Mulberry Bush. The UCL quantitative project that reported in 2018, I think, it was great that they found really good outcomes for the children educationally and socially and emotionally when they finish at the Mulberry Bush School. But there were some really interesting findings, weren't there, about how the children's attachment patterns changed over the course of their placements at the school, not just straightforwardly from insecure attachment to secure, but a more complicated, nuanced picture emerging. So, children moving away from the anxious avoidant style of relating, but not all becoming more secure, which I guess we might expect. And I just wanted to say a word about the qualitative project that I was involved in, actually, at the University of East London. I think what we found really interesting about the practitioner work in the organisation was the fact that staff didn't just squash or suppress or repress disturbed behaviour or troubling behaviour in the setting. So they didn't come in and use heavy behavioural modification methods or sanctions or exclusion. There was a real effort to think with the children about what their behaviour meant and what was going on for them, and to talk with other staff members and with other children about what was happening. And that was quite a risky strategy, some people might see is quite permissive, and perhaps going against the grain of a more zero tolerance type approach. But it requires very fine judgment and a lot of skill to do that successfully and keep everyone safe. And we thought it was a very interesting balance that staff were holding there.
My name's Dawn Davidson. I'm the Charity Learning and Development Lead. And I've been at the Mulberry Bush, my second incarnation. I was there once before as a practitioner, but I rejoined the Mulberry Bush just at the point that the FDA was just starting. And it was around the time that the government were beginning to introduce an expectation for workers within health and social care to have a qualification for working in this field. And historically, the qualifications and the requirements of people working in this field have been very low. So an NVQ level 3 was introduced for staff in this particular sector. And it was a real struggle within the organisation to get people to engage with it. And I think one of the issues that people were really struggling with was the fact that it was incredibly generic. It was a qualification that spanned the entire field of working with children and young people. And the work that we do is very unique in terms of working therapeutically with primary age children within a residential setting. So it was very different to the kind of things that were being covered in the MVQ. So in consultation with Ofsted, and it was agreed that perhaps we could develop our own qualification that might be more bespoke, might be better fitted to the needs of the children and young people that we were working with. And I think what has come out of working with the FDA has been a sharing of understanding and a sharing of language and a sharing of the therapeutic, the academic underpinnings of the work that we do. I think the Mulberry Bush has always been very underpinned by theory, and we've talked earlier about the fact that Barbara Docker-Drysdale, who wrote extensively in the school, was underpinned by her work, and then her work with Donald Winnicott, and so we were informed by his work as well. But actually sort of bringing a shared understanding and expectation of all of our staff to be able to make sense of the theory and how they relate it to practice was really important. And I think one of the things that we've realised is that often in organisations, the knowledge, and particularly academic knowledge, is held in higher parts of the organisation. But actually, through introducing the FDA and having everybody having a really clear understanding of the theory that underpins the work that we do, actually it allows conversations to happen far more vertically within the organisation. So it's not held in one place. And I think that the way that people think about things and the way that people are able to have those discussions at various different levels within the organisation have really been facilitated by making sure that everybody has a similar knowledge and understanding of the theory that underpins the work.
My name is Elsa Bouillard, and I am a therapeutic childcare practitioner in the residential part of the school, which means that I work in the houses. I work in the 52-week provision. Yeah, so it's basically like a children's home I work in during the holidays, where children who don't have any foster placement or adoptive parents or anywhere to go to come to us. So there's currently 6 children in the whole school who comes there during the holidays. And in term time, me and my team work in the other houses, which is morning and after school kind of house duties, really. Being a student in the FDA and a practitioner, working and studying traumatized children in residential care is definitely intense, and it's a challenge. It's a little bit like being an anthropologist in the field in a way, because you're able to observe the theories that you read about on a daily basis. But at the same time, it's a unique opportunity to be able to read, and study theories like attachment theory or other psychodynamic concepts, and then apply them. It is quite enriching, because it allows you to have a deeper insight on the trauma of the children you work with, but also on the group dynamics that there are between the children, between the adults as well, the practitioners, and between both groups, the children and the adults. It's also an opportunity to stop and think and be at a distance, and then reapply what you've read and studied and thought about, and use that to help support the children and your own responses as well, because to intense situations at work. When it comes to, the opportunity to publish and to have a journal that allows you to publish some of your work is a great opportunity for people to also know about a practitioner's view of the work. So it's quite rewarding, really. There's also another thing that we have a reading group in the school that actually Dawn presides over, or Karen, or is it both of you? Or it's once a month where we have the opportunity to read an article and on a specific topic linked to the work, which is also, usually it's an academic article, but it doesn't have to be. And it provides an opportunity for whoever wants to attend once a month and to kind of discuss. And that provides a different way of seeing, this theory, because you don't discuss with your fellow students, you discuss with people who are in completely different parts of the organization. And it's, in a way, it's applied differently. You think about it differently, because you don't have an assignment to write. You don't have to think about your own practice in the same way. So there's kind of 2 different ways of seeing theory and using it. One more thing about the benefits, really, of applying theory to research is just understanding your the trauma the children went through, and understanding behaviors. I remember there was a case of a child who it was like a really intense experience for me. It's a child who had kind of like, he was leaving the school and he was regressing really to being like a toddler, and I had to spoon feed him and dress him, and I didn't understand his behavior and how it affected me until a year later. I studied like a specific like a concept that applied to his behavior, and that freed me. I didn't realize that for a year it had stayed with me, and because I hadn't processed it, I hadn't understood it. So that's also really, really liberating.
My name is Michelle Bassett. I am a senior teaching assistant and nurture group practitioner. I've been with the Mulberry Bush organisation for 4 years. So I graduated from the FDA 2 years ago. I think when I first started at the Mulberry Bush, I think there was a 6-month period before I started the FDA. And I think in that time, I was consumed by experiences. So experiences of the children, experiences of their behaviour, experiences of how other practitioners, experienced practitioners, spoke to the children and the way that they talked around the children and about the children in such a thoughtful way. And I think that's, you go through, some days you get hurt, but to be able to sit and think about what that behaviour was whilst also feeling quite hurt yourself can be quite difficult. So I think for me, starting the FDA, it kind of opened my eyes to looking at the theory about Winnicott, Barbara Drucker-Dysdale, looking at Freud, and going back Melanie Klein, people like that, and just thinking about all of that quite historic stuff that's been brought forward and worked upon and developed further in more recent years. And I guess for me, I was able to look at the children with a different pair of eyes and understand what was going on for them. So making those links. Also, the FDA teaches you're kind of forced into these reflective situations that are quite uncomfortable with people that you didn't choose to sit and share those feelings with. So it also puts, I think, the children are pushed together. They don't choose to be here. We push them together into these houses, into these classrooms. And for me, that was an experience similar to what they were experiencing, I guess, in coming in and being put in these groups and being asked to reflect and to learn about ourselves as well as about the work that we're doing. So there's lots of learning going on a sort of emotional and personal level for me, but also on that practical level, working directly with the children. I think something came up earlier about why theory is important. Why do we need to know? And if these children are deeply traumatized children, and on the face of their behaviour, they could go through life and not, unless you understand what you've got in front of you are children misbehaving in a classroom, without that deep knowledge of where they've come from, why all of the trauma that they've had, how that impacts their behaviour and what their behaviour is telling you, I don't think unless there's somebody there to understand that and to support the children with it, it feels a bit hopeless. So for me, I think the theory is important because we need to understand what's going on for these children, or for our children, but also it informs everything we do. I always look back at my reflective journal, at all of the different things that I've used for the FDA, even some of my essays that I've written, I still go back and relook at them because they help me with my work, as much as all of the books that I know that we've had our Mulberry Bush 70th anniversary book that I do dip into and read chapters by different people at points, because it really does help me focus me on my work.
Yeah, I'm Stuart Harrigan, and I'm a senior family and networks practitioner, and also the deputy head of the Therapies and Networks team. And yeah, while in my role, I'm not child facing, I suppose it's important that we are often the people who are explaining the work and helping other people understand the work of the school, parents, carers, and the people who are paying for the children to be here. So it's important for us to still have a good understanding of that research and the theories behind the work that we do, or the work that the school does, and to interpret them into and in ways that other people can understand, how birth families, how social workers, how people who don't have a background in this type of work can understand why we might not tell children off in a way that they might think we should be telling children off, how we might not punish them in the way that we might, and I suppose how the school can often be seen as a permissive environment when, let's not what it is at all. And while our foster carers are part of other fostering agencies, they are in a slightly different position in that their children are away from them for most of the time, and that the reason their children are away from them for a lot of the time is because of their more extreme behaviours that they can present. And they were telling us as well that they didn't feel they were always understood by their agencies and by other carers. So we have started a foster carers group, which originally was only once a term because of distances that people had to travel. But during COVID, we've extended that and increased that to twice a term because they're being done virtually now. And that is a really valued space by the parents. Again, it's while it's not a reflective space, it has elements of that in it. It's unagendered, and they are very much the experts and the people who will help and support each other. We've also extended that now to adoptive families and special guardians, which similarly has had a very positive response. We have a member of our team who is currently doing the FDA. She's coming to the end of her course, and her final project is looking at the effectiveness and the value of the of these groups.
One large project that has been ongoing now for quite a few years is we have developed a social and emotional tool or a measure, sort of a paper questionnaire, because there aren't assessing how well children are socially and emotionally has been quite a difficult thing to measure, not just for us, but sort of internationally. And so there are, for example, there's something called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, the SDQ, which is used all over the world, and in the United Kingdom, it's particularly used in CAMS, so in a mental health setting, for working out lots of different things. And we in the organisation, we've looked at that tool and other tools, but they don't really take into account the struggles and the difficulties and the sort of the traumatic nature of the children's experiences and what they're like to be alongside in the classroom and in group living. So we felt that we didn't really want to use those kinds of scales because they weren't terribly helpful for us in terms of our work. So together we worked out, so what actually is it that we think, how would we know if a child was improving or their social and emotional development was on the right pathway? How would we know that? What is it that we do? So we put together a load of questions and ideas. We got staff in different areas of the organisation to contribute, and so we came up with lots of ideas about what we think. And we gave this to, or we found collaborators at the University of Sussex, particularly Professor Robin Banerjee, and we've had a PhD student and a master's student and an undergraduate student who have worked on all of this together with us and come up with this 25-item questionnaire. And we've got a website for the C-Scale, and we're now hopefully we are fundraising for a PhD student to take all of that learning and to answer some more questions about the C-Scale. So it's a bit of a long answer to say we've come up with a homegrown questionnaire that we think will be useful for children who have really experienced the kind of trauma, early years trauma, that our children have experienced. SEA, Social and Emotional Adjustment, SEA. And it's quite timely because the Department of Education and the National Children's Bureau and somebody else now who's now gone out of my mind in 2018 and 2020, in national reports about our population of children all said that we need measurements and tools which really take into account the complexity of the needs of the children. And so we feel that the tool that we've come up with, the C-Scale, goes some way to filling this gap. So that's quite an important and exciting development for us, really. We are collaborating with the Rees Centre at the Department of Education at Oxford University, and we're in the process of planning and designing a longitudinal retrospective sort of historical look at the outcomes for our ex-pupils. So we have ex-pupils who were at the school in the 50s, right the way through to 80s, 90s, 2000s, and we're hoping to use their archive, the archive data, as well as following up with sort of semi-structured interviews with people who are interested, these ex-pupils who are interested in researching with us, to think about their experience over the years and what is it maybe when they look back on their childhood at the Mulberry Bush. Is there something that's what is the Mulberry Bushness that they've all experienced, really, and how that stayed with them over the years? Has it stayed with them? If it has, what have they learned from it? You know, we're particularly interested, or I'm particularly interested in, is there an intergenerational impact that had, that these children were at the school between, say, the age of, you know, in their primary, junior age, and now as they've gone on to have their own families or not? What have they learned about themselves as parents, or maybe not as being parents, that they might attribute to something that they learned when they were very young at the Mulberry Bush? We're also thinking that something about our particular way of doing life story work might link in with that. So that's going to be maybe a new development in thinking about the life story work in our particular way, about helping children create a narrative for themselves that might have a longitudinal impact. Those are quite big links to make. I realise that, and in terms of actual research, that's quite tricky really to prove or to try and say something about. But we're working with the Rees Centre to try and do something about that, really. The Rees Centre is a part of the Department of Education at Oxford University, and they are looking at outcomes for children in residential care, for children in adoptive placements, and for children in foster settings. And they are a very good collaborator for us. They are, you know, they're a nice, they give us kudos really as an organisation. So it's very nice. We want to be linked to them, and actually they want to be linked to us, because we have this pool of ex-pupils and also, you know, a nice pool of current pupils. So we can help each other.
Yeah, so I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody again for all your contributions, you know, to Karen and to John and Michelle and Elsa and John again and Dawn, of course. It's been a very rich discussion and much food for thought. Thank you, everyone.